The feud between Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio showing no signs of letting up, and a brand new poll shows voters are getting fed up. We're going to get into that and all things New York City with the top reporter from Politico. Then Russia and the U.S. aren't exactly getting along, but at least they're talking for the first time in a year. Our top military analyst is here to explain how Vladimir Putin is flexing his muscles in Syria and why that is a major concern. Also, the Democrats are reaching out to Hispanics while the GOP continues to take the hard line on immigration, why the GOP could regret that in a big way come Election Day. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in tonight for Richard French, and tonight we start with New York, New York. Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio, a governor and a mayor who just can't seem to get along, and now it seems as though New Yorkers have close to just about had enough. A brand new Quinnipiac poll shows most New Yorkers believe the feud is real and not just a media creation. And of those people, 3/4 of them say it's harmful to voters. And it doesn't look like the feud is hurting Governor Cuomo in the city. His approval rating much higher than the mayor's, that in the mayor's own city. Cuomo sits at 55%. De Blasio, his numbers are underwater. A short time ago, I spoke with Politico New York's senior City Hall reporter Ozzy Padbara about that and a whole lot more. Ozzy, let's start with that Q poll. Voters think Cuomo is besting de Blasio in their feud, and really, why wouldn't they? Those voters are also plenty critical of de Blasio and what he's been doing, but 78% say the feud is harming the people of New York. Is there a point at which Cuomo wins this fight with de Blasio, but does so at too high a cost for himself?
Well, it seems to be Cuomo's strategy to almost deny that there was a feud. And his latest remarks to reporters was that he actually doesn't even care about the perception. His entire MO since coming into the governor's office has all been about accomplishing results. He said government is not a debate society. He sort of eschews the personality politics of a lot of the media coverage. So even though he does a lot of things to needle de Blasio, who used to work for him over at HUD, he's very reluctant to acknowledge it openly, despite the results from that poll.
You wonder if at some point he's going to have to. What's the cost of this feud been for de Blasio, though? His numbers are way down.
Right. Well, it created a framework by which a lot of people perceived his individual missteps as part of a greater narrative. Remember, he had a fight with Uber that he lost. He's been criticized from the left over police reform issues. You even had the public advocate Letitia James, who's been a reliable ally, having her name floated as a potential candidate. And also you have Ray Kelly, the former police commissioner, who published a book recently, a memoir. In his tour to promote that book, he's also airing criticisms of de Blasio. So you've had a lot of these instances where Cuomo has been very motivated to find new allies who are critics of de Blasio and sort of prop them up. Hakeem Jeffries, Scott Stringer, Letitia James. He's appeared with a number of them. Even Melissa Mark-Viverito, the city council speaker who de Blasio helped install. Cuomo went on a trip with her to Puerto Rico and did not invite the mayor. So because of this feud, Cuomo has done things to sort of elevate the profile of people who've been critical of de Blasio.
Any sense that the mayor has learned from this feud, maybe to not pick a fight he doesn't know in advance he can win?
What he has done is say he should get points for taking the correct stance, whether or not he's able to accomplish something. He has waved the progressive banner on any number of issues, and even though he hasn't been able to execute results in some of those areas, the strategy appears to be the standard bearer, to be the person waving the flag, and you get points for trying, whereas Cuomo sort of does the opposite in terms of trying to get results and eschewing the process. It appears that de Blasio has not kept up that same level of rhetoric against the governor, and it may be because he's seeing some diminishing results, but it's also very difficult to sort of keep up, volume at 10 after the first day when he really let this out. It was curious when he first did it, what was going to be the strategy for following it up. And what Cuomo did was hunker down, pick up new allies, and maintain a focus on not engaging directly. And it's been de Blasio who's sort of been left wondering what to do next, apparently.
And Ozzy, all of this comes as word starts to leak out that de Blasio's prepping for a re-election run. Are you getting a sense that Gracie Mansion's worried about his chances?
Not so much worried, but it appears that they are acknowledging a shift into the second half of first term, which obviously has an eye on re-election. Remember, Michael Bloomberg had very bad poll numbers around this time. He was a person with a limitless amount of money and not running on the Democratic line, so it was a little bit unique. What de Blasio did recently was tell the Daily News editorial board that he spent his first roughly 2 years laying the groundwork and foundation for accomplishments. And what he's going to do now is sort of talk more about those accomplishments. He's sort of characterizing his problems as a communication problem and not so much as a policy problem or having any made real substantive mistakes. What he's acknowledged is that he's going to talk to more, quote unquote, real New Yorkers, maybe an acknowledgement that he hasn't done that before. He's appearing more regularly on WNYC's Brian Lehrer show, where he's taking callers. And he's even floated the idea of perhaps even doing town hall meetings, unscripted events with regular New Yorkers where anything can happen. He had avoided those to such a degree that Newsday wrote a story saying he was avoiding town hall meetings. And this coming from the guy who said the public leads and politicians follow. Well, he didn't seem to be following that type of advice, and now they seem to be having a course correction.
And then, Ozzy, quickly on Times Square with the Desnudas and the Elmos and all of that that's been a headache for the mayor. That task force that he was pushing for is now recommending separate zones, one for activities and one for basically pedestrians. This feels like it could be a lose-lose for the mayor. I mean, if it works, it's the task force's idea. If it doesn't work, it's still all on de Blasio.
Well, that's one view. The idea is that this area is sort of hectic and chaotic no matter what. This is part of what attracts people to New York. But the fact that he did something, the fact that he had to get prompted into doing this, you can argue he could have said, this is the way Times Square is, and sort of dismiss it. But he seemed to be addressing this as a way to address the larger issue of quality of life. There is no place in New York as high profile as Times Square. And if there's this general sense, real or not, that quality of life is declining, this was an area where he could show some change. And hopefully that would sort of alleviate this other criticism. So he had to do something from their point of view. Well,
and if he's focused on PR and improving his public image, this will be an interesting one to see if he can spin it well enough, at least when it comes to voters.
Right. How many regular New Yorkers care about Times Square? And I've heard from a number of people who said his stated reason for trying to address the topless ladies at Times Square was that it was some type of issue that was degrading or just not appropriate for women. Well, there are other issues that he could have addressed. Harassment on subways. Many women have reported groping and other uncomfortable experiences on subways. That's an issue that he's not addressing. And also, if you have the naked cowboy in Times Square, how really out of the ordinary is it to have women who are also topless, even with some paint on? So it was a curious battle to pick up, and he was driven into it by tabloid coverage, something that his aides had said for quite a while, something that they did not pay attention to, and apparently they are.
Topless women and naked cowboys. Boy, if that's not New York politics, I don't know what is. Ozzy Pebara, senior City Hall reporter for Politico New York. Ozzy, thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring in our panel. Mike Morey is a senior vice president of public relations at SKD Knickerbocker, and Dominic Carter is here, a political journalist and author. And Mike, we know that Cuomo likes to play bully politics, and he sees a potential threat in de Blasio and goes after him. But when the numbers start coming back that show the public isn't happy and feels like they're being shortchanged on this, what's the upside? Obviously, there's a political upside for Cuomo, but what's the upside in continuing to do it?
You know, so there has historically, there's always been a beef between the mayor of New York City and the governor of New York. What folks sort of fell out of the habit of realizing was with Michael Bloomberg had a series of governors who were fairly hapless or scandal-plagued, and so he had a larger playground in which to play without competition from Albany. Most of everything New York City needs to get done has to have the approval of Albany first. So remember, New York City is a creature of the state, so you have a natural tension there. If you want to get something done in New York City, you got to have the governor's help. So that's one. And I think that de Blasio is operating in New York City as a mayor when you have a strong governor with some consistency, no Spitzer, no Patterson, no hapless last term of Pataki. So he's up against a guy who's actually running things. Now, a feud like this never is good for anybody, and the polling shows that numbers have gone down both for the governor and for the mayor. However, if you look at the numbers, the governor's numbers are just under 50%. De Blasio is in a really bad spot right now. I mean, 37%. 37% of people in New York City thinks he's doing a good job now. That's a dangerous place to be. So, one, why does the governor do it? Because the governor controls the city. He's exercising the power that the state has. He has undermined the mayor. The mayor has made some tactical errors. One, not recognizing that the Republicans control the New York State Senate. He made some boo-boos in the way he engaged the state legislature. These are people the governor has to deal with to get things done.
But if it's a pox on both their houses, I mean, at some point it becomes less valuable for Cuomo to keep going there.
Well, look, I don't know. I think the governor said the right thing today, which was, frankly, it's not about personalities. It's not about getting in the way of the people's business. Should they both be concerned that the public is starting to say that these two guys who are supposed to be leaders of New York City and New York State can't get along? And when they start to, what could happen and where the danger starts to emerge is if something were to happen on a public policy level that anyone can then point the finger and say, this is because you two guys can't get along. You two guys keep punching at each other. That's when it's going to hurt. It's starting to hurt a little bit, but if truth be told, I would not be that concerned right now. The governor should be concerned about his numbers. Broadly, they're down. That's largely due to things like Common Core. That's largely due to Albany corruption. I would be more concerned right now if I were the mayor of New York City.
And Mike is 1,000% correct, and here's why. Cuomo, as of right now, can say, listen, I'm doing my job the way any governor would. A sideshow that I'm having with the mayor of New York is not affecting my professional relationship as it relates to New York City. He's also correct in his assessment of the traditional battles between Albany, I'm going to say Albany as opposed to just the governor, Albany and the mayor of New York. Even for Mike Bloomberg, Mr. Billionaire himself, with all the money, where things went his way because folks were afraid, if you will, of taking him on, even for Mike Bloomberg, if you don't believe that Albany has more power than the mayor of New York, go ask Bloomberg about the Jets that play on the west side of Manhattan these days. It didn't happen. For all of his money, Bloomberg pushed hard for a West Side stadium, and the speaker, Shelley Silver, said, hell no. Project dead on arrival.
But for all of Andrew Cuomo's claims that, no, this isn't a feud, I'm just doing my job, the voters have clearly said, yeah, you are engaged in a feud, and now 78% of them are saying it's hurting me. At some point, does that begin to erode Cuomo's ability to operate?
No, you have to understand. I'm going to say what Mike won't. You have to understand the personality of Andrew Cuomo. He knows one speed and one speed only. Full speed ahead. Anybody gets in my way, they must be destroyed. Seek and destroy.
But when you go full speed ahead into a brick wall, or at least 78%,
why is it a brick wall?
78% of New Yorkers are beginning to say.
But look at what the governor's doing. The governor is actually, I think, really playing this out quite strategic in that. So he takes a trip down to Puerto Rico with Melissa Mark Viverito. He shows up and has the Vice President of the United States here to talk about infrastructure. What he's showing is that, look, I get along with a lot of people. We have a dispute, a constant dispute between New York City and Albany. Now, they're both being affected by it, but the public clearly sees. And in fact, the other part of that poll that's not being shown is that the public actually believes half of or more than half, I don't remember what the exact number was, things aren't getting done in Albany. It's because the mayor didn't do a good enough job to negotiate what he needed out of Albany.
Oh, it's definitely hurting de Blasio far more than it's hurting Cuomo. Far more than it's hurting Cuomo. And now de Blasio is starting to talk about re-election. Is it a little too early for that, or is it a little too late for that?
If you're Bill de Blasio, you better start thinking about re-election now, because it might be a hope and a dream for this mayor. It's tough to beat an incumbent. I say this sincerely, not because he's here, and he worked with Quinn's campaign. He needs people like Mike and professionals like that if he's to have a shot at all at re-election. I don't know what's going on with Team de Blasio. I mean, normally when you're an incumbent mayor, people will tell you what you want to hear. They don't tell you the truth, those that are closest to you. But he's so far off the ledge Well, I mean, maybe he can win, but I don't know.
Look, it is time for him to start thinking. He's about to wrap up his second full year. He's in the second half of his first term now. This is where people start to line up and make some decisions. If I'm him, the person I'm actually most concerned about is a guy most people watching this show won't know about, which is Don Peebles. I think the greatest chance that you have to defeat Bill de Blasio is in a Democratic primary with an African American, and Don Peebles is independently wealthy as well. So even if he doesn't run on the Democratic line, he certainly can run on the independence line, pick up the Republican line, play a sort of Mike Bloomberg strategy, and pick up some African American votes, which frankly, if you've paid any attention to some of the preachers in New York City who brought de Blasio to the dance in many respects, there's been a lot of angst, a lot of concern. So 2 years in, it is time to start thinking about re-election.
And finally, Mike, Team de Blasio seems to think that this is a communications problem. If we just clarify our message and show I'm connecting with people in a way that hasn't happened so far, that'll fix my numbers.
Yeah, you know,
is it more than that?
They are right to a degree. I mean, the fact is, Bill de Blasio has some major accomplishments in his first term. One, he's been able to settle contracts that Michael Bloomberg wasn't able to settle in 12 years. He has actually put in place a universal pre-kindergarten program for the largest city in the United States. Those are no small potatoes. He does have a perception problem. The notion that crime is on the rise is actually not really true. There have been some high-profile incidents. Murders are up, yes. Overall, crime is not on the rise in New York City. Homelessness is where it was the day he took office. His problem is a perception one. In the beginning of his term, you show up late to your job. Sometimes you say the wrong thing at the wrong moment. You don't look like you enjoy the job. You don't look like you understand. You show up late to a memorial service for victims of a plane crash. The impression that gets sent is that maybe this guy's not into the job, and therefore events define you as opposed to your record. So he does have a communication problem.
Or, Andrew, how about your auditioning for the next higher job when you just got elected to this one? The people of New York are nuts, and barely got elected in the primary to this one. See, it seems like Team de Blasio seems to forget that he barely got past Quinn and Bill Thompson. And so Rudy Giuliani, I defy either one of you to tell me where Rudy Giuliani traveled out of town in his first term in the first couple of years. Can you think of any trip that Giuliani took?
It was also 20 years ago.
Mike Bloomberg traveled every weekend, but he never told anyone.
Right. So I mean, it's a perception problem, and the perception is that the mayor, the perception is that the mayor already thinks that he's bigger than the city of New York, and he's, it's just not working. It's not working.
All right, we want to get you at home involved in the conversation. Head over to Facebook, head to Twitter, sound off on our question today. Do you think Mayor Bill de Blasio deserves a second term? Up next, Syria is already a serious mess, and Russia is making it even messier. Vladimir Putin is talking tough and acting even tougher yet again. This time in Syria, top military analyst and Iraq war veteran is here to explain the repercussions for the U.S.